7 o'clock.
All right. Good evening, everyone. A meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, April 19th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber and via Zoom, which meeting link can be found on the agenda and on the city's website. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
Present.
Alderman at Large Michael B. O'Brien Jr., Vice Chair.
It's actually senior, but not to be confused with junior, but I'm present.
Alderman John Cathy.
Present.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here as well, and we have Director Matt Sullivan as well from the Planning and Development Department.
And
And
also,
Alderwoman
Trish
Trish
Clee
Clee.
is also present.
Forgot your name.
How
for a
quickly
minute.
they forget.
Who? What? So I am going to, having heard the roll, I'm going to declare that the public hearing for O22-010, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding synthetic nicotine and electronic smoking device sales in lounges. Before we open it up to testimony from the public, I would like to have Alderwoman Clee speak to this because this is her bill.
Thank you, and if I may, if I could invite Director Sullivan
Yes,
up
Director
as
Sullivan,
well.
you want to come up and have a seat,
Yeah.
please?
This bill came about for a number of reasons. I was approached by a few of our nonprofit organizations that had some concerns, and so let me kind of back up a little bit. One of the things when we went to the planning board was they asked, is this a reactionary piece of legislation? And my answer was just about every piece of legislation is reactionary, because we find that there are some issues along the way, and we try to rectify it. And what happened was that a vape shop type of company opened up right next to a youth service organization. The vape shop did everything they could to try to mitigate any kind of smoke that could go over to the children in the play area that the children would be in, but as much as they've tried, they just can't do it. So we want to try to avoid something like that from happening. The particular organization didn't feel that they had enough kind of, I should say, legislative backing to help them to stop something from that happening. And our planning board does a phenomenal job of following our rules and precedent and so on. So that's kind of how this came to be. And I'm going to allow Director Sullivan to kind of give all the nuances of it, but the bottom line is it's to help protect children through youth service organizations, camps, schools, and so on. And I want it to be known that while this is in place, it's not saying that these organizations can't come to the city. It's not doing, it's just kind of setting up parameters, much like we do with gas stations and other things like that. So I'll let Director Sullivan give all the exact information on it. So thank you.
Director Sullivan, do you have anything else to add?
Just a few comments, if I may, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Alderwoman Clee, for the introduction. Speaking to the technical components of the ordinance, and certainly I'll be available for questions during the public hearing by the committee and also during your consideration of this if necessary. But functionally, this is an adjustment to the Nashua City Land Use Code within 19015, which is known as our permitted uses component of the ordinance. There are several objectives, not to speak for the original drafters of the legislation, but there are several objectives of this legislation, and they're fairly well defined in the draft language. But the first is to amend the classification of use number 137 within the city's land use code table. That's one of about 400 uses contained in that land use code. And particularly, it modifies the current use number 137 to broaden it from tobacco and tobacconist to tobacco, synthetic, nicotine, or other electronic smoking device sales and lounges. So an amendment that functionally broadens that terminology to reflect, I think, more current trends and uses of this type of smoking device. It also changes use number 137 to be what we refer to as a conditional use within 3 zoning districts where currently the tobacco or tobacconist use was permitted, and that's within the general business, the D1 downtown, the D3 downtown, and also the highway business zones. So again, within those 4 zones, this use would be modified to be a conditional use requiring not only review by the planning board and approval, but also a butter notification that comes along with that process, giving the public access and the ability to speak to these applications. Third, it also establishes a buffer of between like uses contemplated under that new use code or modified use code number 137. That buffer is a 1,000-foot, as the crow flies buffer, if you will, intended to be measured property line to property line for like classified uses, and specifically those being those where the primary use is the tobacco, synthetic nicotine device or sales or lounges. And that 1,000-foot requirement will remain in place between those uses. I would note in a conversation prior to the meeting, this is not applied retroactively. Obviously, existing separations that do not meet this new standard would of course be grandfathered and would not be affected by this proposed change. Only those future site developments, redevelopments, or changes of use would be impacted. Fourth, it also establishes a buffer, and this speaks to Alderwoman Clee's initial comments. It establishes a buffer of 1,000 feet between uses under 137 and youth-serving organizations or schools as defined within the legislation. And you can see that at the end of that paragraph number 6. So there's a 1,000-foot requirement, a second 1,000-foot requirement established there. In the interest of those 2 linear requirements, it also, the proposed amendment provides a relief process for applicants or owners or operators interested in establishing a 137 use. That relief process is a waiver process through the planning board. As part of the conditional use permitting process, they would be able to request a waiver for the 1,000-foot separation, provided that, as you see in the legislation, the applicant demonstrates that there are no negative impacts on the direct abutters, neighborhood, or the city, and that it meets the criteria, the board's customary criteria for waivers under section 19148D. And lastly, I would just note that, and one of the critical elements of this is that although there is a waiver mechanism, the planning board may not grant a waiver for any use number 137 that directly abuts a school or youth-serving organization. So although they have the authority to waive other measurements within that 1,000-foot separation, they cannot grant a waiver for the use if it's directly abutting a school or youth-serving organization. And that, again, creates a separation naturally. Happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. I would also just address a few questions I received prior to the hearing this evening. Questions related to what a primary use is. A primary use is a fairly subjective term that's used frequently within our zoning ordinance. In this case, we would likely use an area or square footage measurement of a business to determine what its primary use is. And specifically, I would apply that in the context of questions I received related to whether a gas station selling other goods, including gas, or a grocery store, both of which may happen to sell some vaping or smoke products, would classify under this. They would not. They would remain classified as gas stations with a convenience store use or grocery stores, provided that the primary use of the property does not fall within 137. And lastly, I would just note that there is precedent for separation of uses within the land use code. There's a current 750-foot separation between gas stations required. And while this is certainly a different use, there is precedent for a linear separation measurement within the code as it stands today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Sullivan. Maybe if you can stick around, and if the committee has questions after we have the public hearing.
Great.
So one, I just want to acknowledge that Alderman Alex Camo has joined us on Zoom. And if there's anyone in favor, on Zoom you can raise your hand, or here in the chamber you can come up to the microphone. We just need your name and address for the record. Anyone in favor? All right. I see Mike Ethelberg on Zoom, and before he speaks, I would just like to acknowledge that this gentleman is a gift to the greater Nashua community and New Hampshire. He just returned from a humanitarian mission to Ukraine, and this guy is there's no words to describe this guy.
I agree.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, that's about the most interesting introduction I've received in quite some time, Alderman Moran. Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Mike Apfelberg. I'm the president of the United Way of Greater Nashua, located at 20 Broad Street in Nashua. And I do come to you this evening in support of O22-010. This provision, as you are aware, came about because of the proposal to place a smoke shop directly adjacent to the child care location of the Adult Learning Center at the corner of Lake Street and Main Street. As a result of that proposal, it became clear that there is no provision or resource within the current City of Nashua zoning ordinances to discourage or prohibit the placement of smoke shops or vape shops in close proximity to schools or youth organizations. As a community which values the health and well-being of its children, a coalition of community partners, including United Way, Southern New Hampshire Health, the Adult Learning Center, the Nashua Prevention Coalition, and others, came together to craft the proposed ordinance in conjunction with Matt Sullivan and Alderman Klee. While none of us is anti-business and all of us respect the value and worth of a vibrant business community, it is also self-evident to this group that a smoke shop or vape shop in close proximity or even adjacent to a school or other youth organization is not in the public interest. In fact, in a study titled Density of Tobacco Retailers Near Schools, Effects of Tobacco Use Among Students, which was juried and published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2009, it was found that evidence exists that it is plausible to reduce the rates of youth experimental smoking by reducing the density of smoke shops near schools. There are plenty of places to have these businesses in our community, and many such businesses already exist and thrive. So we feel that it is but a small concession to the health of our youth to put in place this buffer restriction. I will note there is a provision in the ordinance which would allow for a waiver to this rule if the proposed business can demonstrate the lack of a negative effect or harm. I should also note that pre-existing businesses are grandfathered in. We are hopeful that you will see fit to pass this ordinance onto the full Board of Aldermen with a recommendation of support. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom or in the chamber who is in opposition? Opposition? Going once, right? Anyone else in the chamber on Zoom in favor? No one else? Anyone else in the chamber on Zoom in opposition? All right, so I'm going to turn to Alderman O'Brien. Do we close the public hearing?
You'll
And
close
have discussion in the regular meeting?
7:12.
All right, having heard those in favor and opposition, I would declare the public hearing closed at 7:12 p.m. And now, this always catches me. I will open the regular meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee that's held today, April 19th, 2021 at 7:13 p.m. in the Automatic 2022, thank you. Someone, whoever writes these scripts.
Come on, Mel.
At 7 p.m. in the Automatic Chamber, which is also available via Zoom. The meeting link can be found on the agenda and on the city's website. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large, Melbourne Moran Jr.
Present.
Alderman at Large, Michael B. O'Brien Sr., Vice Chair.
Present.
Alderman John Cathy.
Present.
Alderman at Large, Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. We have Director Matt Sullivan in attendance. We also have Alderman Klee and Alderman Como on Zoom.
All right. Having heard the roll, is there any public comment on item, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead.
No. I forgot public comment first.
Any public comment on items to be acted on tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brad Westgate. I'm a lawyer with Weiner & Bennett, 111 Concord Street in Nashua, and I represent Edgestone Properties, Inc. With me is Dave Petropoulos of Edgestone Properties as well. And I've come to speak in favor of the two petitions we filed for Edgestone Properties relative to waiver of the school impact fee for two of Edgestone's residential 55 and older developments, Thompson's Preserve Condominium on Gilson Road, and the Alcove at Walden Woods Condominium, which is on Henry David Drive off Exit 5. I'd just speak to both briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thompson's Preserve is a single-family detached style condominium community, 39 units. The Alcove at Walden Woods Condominium is 63 units in a multifamily structure. The land use code imposes school impact fees, fees for school capital improvements on new residential construction in Nashua. These are one-time fees. They're typically paid by the builder or developer prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for each residential unit. In these two cases, both projects being built out, Edgestone Properties has paid approximately $50,770 in these school impact fees. They're one-time fees, as I mentioned, and they go into a capital account in anticipation of school capital improvements that may come up from time to time. But as the committee knows, in Nashua and every other property in Nashua, all residential units, even those in 55 and older communities, pay the full regular real estate tax, school, city, and county portions. So these one-time fees are in addition to the regular tax. They're not a component of the regular tax. Because certain types of residential developments in the city will not have a material impact on school system requiring capital improvements, 190-85 of the Land Use Code sets a standard by which these impact fees can be waived. And that's what our petition was set out to do, to request waiver of these school impact fees in these cases, because we believe that they fit the standard for the granting of the waiver. In essence, Section 190 of the Land Use Code states that an applicant can petition the Board of Aldermen, the full board, for a full or partial waiver of the school impact fee when the proposed development consists of low or moderate income housing or elderly housing that can reasonably be expected not to require additional educational facilities. So again, these two petitions pertain to elderly housing communities, so-called housing for older persons. With the petitions, we submitted a study by Fougere Planning and Development. That study indicated that of the 55 and older communities that Mr. Fougere surveyed in southern New Hampshire, there were only 5 school-age children in 1,036 units. So it's, I think, quite clear that these kinds of facilities do not impose the need for school capital improvements. Mr. Sullivan has indicated in his memos to you that the planning board granted a favorable recommendation for the two petitions. We would respectfully request that the committee similarly grant to the full board a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, next discussion. I'm assuming this is discussion. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Any more public comment online, via Zoom, or in the chamber? Seeing none. Discussion. Anyone have any comments on the public hearing or any questions for Director Sullivan or Alderman Clee? Yes, Alderman Cappy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to direct my questions to Mr. Sullivan, if I may. The definition of youth-serving organizations, had you or anyone that has talked to you about this had any confusion about that or any questions about if that really does just narrow it down to schools or United Way or something like that, or could it include, I don't know, Sub-Zero ice cream because they serve under 18, that sort of thing? How does this ordinance then cordon off just those places that you're looking at?
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
may.
go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry, Alderman Clement.
Just a point of, I'm not sure, and I appreciate the question, maybe we should get it answered since it's been asked, but maybe after that, we should wait till just a suggestion, we should wait till we get to the ordinance, maybe?
Yeah, so I'm thrown off by this agenda today.
I'm perfectly fine with waiting until we get to the ordinance talk. If we just want to get down to it, that's fine. We
But
can hold off.
since you asked, I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to.
we can get the answer and then we can move on. It's also 2021 and you're a junior.
I have more questions anyway, so it's all right.
I think, there's pulling the new alderman's legs here, I think.
Would you like me to
You
answer,
can
Mr.
answer
Chair?
it, then we'll
Yeah,
move on to-
happy to answer. There hasn't been confusion, but I believe that part of that is that we have not been in the position of implementing the ordinance. And so there's always a level of subjectivity, but I would again point to the fact that this youth-serving organization definition relies on entities whose primary purpose is serving persons under the age of 18. And so I believe I had received a question on the record of the planning board about whether a McDonald's with a playpen would in fact be a use under this proposed youth serving organizations, and the answer would be no. I would argue, as I did at the planning board, that it is very much a we will know it when we see it kind of interpretation, and there's intended subjectivity to that definition. But I do not believe that the use that you just referenced would qualify under this. I really think it's clearly laid out by the schools, child cares, camps, and organizations that are referenced therein. I would note that there was discussion about whether or not a larger nonprofit with a component of child care service would be eligible under this. If that's not the,
Such as what?
maybe not a hard example that I would use, but if only 5% of the service offerings are for childcare, if there were to be a new organization formed or one to come to the city, it would not qualify, in my opinion, under this definition. It would have to be greater than 50% of the programming or 50% of the space within the use of the building or the area that would be needed in order to qualify it under this definition. But it is subjective.
Thank you.
So we'll hold the questions until,
Can I just add?
I don't want to get down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So let's hold our questions.
Good job.
I just wanted to clarify it.
Definitely you will have the chance, Alderman. Communications.
We have one, two, three, all from Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director. First one is a referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed O-22-010, amending the land use code by adding provisions regarding synthetic nicotine and electronic smoking device sales in lounges. Communication 2, also from Director Sullivan, referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed petition by Edgestone Properties, Inc. for a full waiver of impact fees for public school facilities as authorized under section 190-85 of the Land Use Code, Thompson's Preserve Condominium. And the third one, also from Director Sullivan, referral from the Board of Aldermen on proposed petition by Edgestone Properties, Inc. for full waiver of impact fees for public school facilities as authorized under section 190-85 of the Land Use Code, the Alcove at Walden Woods Condominium.
There being no objection, I'll accept the communications and place them on file. We did receive a communication from Kevin Walker, Vice President of Construction and Engineering from John Flatley Company, that arrived after the agenda was prepared. And without objection, I would like to accept that communication and note that it was received after the agenda was prepared and place it on file. Any objections? No. With no objection, I accepted the communication and placed it on file. Petitions.
So I move to recommend granting, denying, or denying the petition for full waiver of impact fees for public school facilities as authorized under section 190-85 of the Land Use Code, Thompson's Preserve Condominium.
I think it's, I think we would entertain a motion for final passage.
Yep.
Granting, yes.
So moved, anyway?
Go ahead, Ben. You're up first, so.
It should be a motion to accept the petition and grant the petition.
All right.
Granting.
I accept that as.
Yeah.
That's my motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? Alderman Kathy, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything necessarily against. I just wanted to note, since I am on the planning board, there was what I would consider some robust dialogue about the land use code in this particular instance, especially 190-77, which is the computation table that they use for the impact fees. It does not specifically state low income, quote unquote, or 55 plus. And so there was quite a bit of back and forth about the planning board possibly recommending that the Board of Aldermen in the future look at that land use code and think about maybe changing it or amending it in some way. So this, because there was a lot of back and forth, because it doesn't say exactly that wording, and so it was not as clear as they probably wanted it to be, and so they requested that I make that notation to the Board of Aldermen. So I'm just making it now that in the future we should look at the impact fee table and think about maybe making it a little bit more clear for situations such as this in the future. Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, through the chair, can I ask Mr. Sullivan a question?
Absolutely.
Mr. Sullivan, I have no problem in granting these. I understand the flavor that this is going to be an older or more seasoned type of resident. I'm very careful with my words here, you know. But, and they're gonna have a very low impact on the schools and everything. But that being said, what happens if the development gets sold? What do we do in those cases? Is there any type of lien or anything else like that, such as like, it cannot, you know, be resold for a period, like a moratorium of a couple of years or something like that, protection to the city? So somebody doesn't fast track something inadvertently to get by. It's not saying that it would occur, but just in case.
If I may, Mr. Chair, a great question, and one that admittedly I don't think came up at the planning board as part of their deliberations, but it's important to keep in mind that both of these projects were proposed and approved under the Housing for Older Persons provisions of the city's land use code. And as a result, the land use approvals that are associated with both bind the projects to comply with those standards as they were when they were approved. As a result, any modifications to the age restriction and therefore the potential granting of the impact fee waivers this evening would require a formal amendment to that plan, in my opinion, through the planning board. Essentially, to remove those restrictions, a formal amendment would be necessary. As a result, although these impact fee waivers would run with the land, the planning board would ultimately have the both power and authority to grant or not grant an amendment to the site plan in the future to remove the restrictions.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you, Chair.
Alderman Kathy.
Just a clarifying question for Alderman O'Brien, so I understood his question. You were saying, what if they try to bypass the impact fees and then sell it off, and then they don't have to do a 55 plus, and they don't have impact fees? Is that what you're asking?
Basically, in a nutshell, yeah. In such a case, 10 years goes by, and then they decide that they want to get out and they liquidate the property. But from what Mr. Sullivan has explained, and correct me if I'm wrong. Well, Mr. Sullivan, you have your hand up. You could better explain it.
I should just briefly state that this is a deed restricted property. And so there's from the potential conveyance of the property, there is a deed restriction that limits these units to elderly housing. And so that will be protected as a result of the planning board and land use approval for future conveyances until such time that a potential owner came back to the city and either there were no such ordinances in place or the planning board entertained an amendment to that plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Cleave.
Thank you. When you, Director Sullivan, you brought up the deed restriction, I had a conversation with your predecessor relative to putting in this type of housing. In order for that to actually happen, every property owner within that community would have to have their deed changed. Is that not correct?
It would begin with an amendment process through the planning board, but my understanding, and certainly I know Attorney Westgate is here, but the public portion of the meeting is closed, but my understanding is that amendments to the deeds would be necessary if in fact that approval were amended to remove the 55 plus restriction. Obviously the owners within the development would be interested in seeking an amendment to the deed to allow them to convey to another owner that doesn't meet the requirements.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any further discussion? I just have one statement. Maybe Alderman Kathy and Director Sullivan can work on fixing that loophole. Some legislation.
Yeah, work on it.
All right. With no more further discussion, I believe the motion from Alderman Clemmons is to recommend granting the petition for a full waiver of impact fees as authorized under section 190-85 of the Land Use Code, Thompson's Preserve Condominium. We're all here, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. All right, the next petition, I would entertain another motion granting full waiver of impact fees for section 190-85 of the Land Code.
So
Either
moved.
one, doesn't matter.
So moved.
All right, discussion. No discussion. All right. No further discussion. I believe the motion from Alderman Clemmons is to recommend granting the petition for full waiver of impact fees for public school facilities as authorized under section 190-85 of the Land Use Code, the Alcove at Walden Woods Condominium. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Unfinished business.
There is none.
New business with
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Would the with your permission, would it not be better, since we're waiting for a testimony of something, to mix up the agenda and take new business?
Yes,
at
I
this
was just
particular
gonna
time?
ask if we could suspend the rules and move the agenda around, and as we wait for someone to speak on R22-023. So with that,
You have to motion for that, right, in a vote for
Yes.
suspension?
yes, motion to suspend the rules to take the agenda out of order. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. All right. New business. Do I have a motion for final passage of 022-010?
So moved.
Right, discussion? I'm gonna follow up with Alderman Clee because she had a question after the first.
It's not so much a question, it was just kind of a, to add to what Director Sullivan had said to Alderman Kathy. And that was, one of the things to keep in mind is that we did spell it out, but something like PAL would be considered a youth service organization, and you wouldn't open something like that up. And I do believe that that was actually kind of brought up somewhat at the planning board, as I think Director Sullivan said, that McDonald's play area would not be. And I just want the general public to know is that we're being very specific on it. I don't want anybody to suddenly think that we're gonna start saying who can go next to these areas and push out like a Burger King or something to that nature. So it's meant for primary use of both, primary use of a youth service organization, or at least a high percentage of a youth service organization, as well as the primary use of the tobacco, vaping, and so on. And it's not to nitpick and to give anybody that leeway. Some people had actually said, well, you know, you're not saying all these really, really tough words of this. We left it a little bit kind of, I don't want to say subjective as much, but subjective is the correct word, to give the planning board that leeway. When you start getting so prescriptive and writing down everything, things fall through the cracks because there's something you can't possibly think of. And we also gave the planning board the ability, if, as it was very specifically stated, it was shown that there was that harm was being done or something like that they had that flexibility as long as it didn't physically abut. And I really want people to understand this. The organizations that came through that weren't able to come here today because they have conflicts. You know, we had Reverend Becerra from downtown, and Carol Baldwin from the Adult Learning Center, who is impacted by the current one there. These are all organizations that deal with youth and so on. But the one thing I want to say, and I want to ask Director Sullivan this very specific question is, when we're talking about youth service organizations, and you can, when the churches have these youth service, and for instance, like First Church up on Library Hill, up that area there, where they actually have school in there and so on, they would be one of these youth service organizations because they actually have a school in there, but not necessarily a church that may have some kind of youth program. I'd like you to clarify that so we understand that better.
Go ahead, Director.
Excellent question. And we have several religious institutions that are operating dedicated schooling programs out of their locations. In my opinion, in that case, as an established use on the property, assuming that the use is permitted by the land use code, those would be classified as schools. And I would, just as you did, differentiate it from the fact that if a religious institution is providing an infrequent but regular youth service, that likely would not qualify it as a school or youth serving organization. And I would just, while I have the mic, I would just say that to Alderman Clee's point, although we would love specificity as land use regulators and administrators, specificity can be extremely dangerous, and it also often results in us not being contemplative enough about what uses might arise in the future. And so we did write this subjectively for just that purpose, just to emphasize the point.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to Zoom. Alderman Camo. I don't know if that was a promotion or demotion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a quick question for Director Sullivan, if I could ask through you. Director Sullivan, you mentioned earlier that what you would define a youth serving organization as far as their primary purpose would be something about the percentage of programs they offer. So an institution that has a lot of different programs, but only some of them are youth serving, in your opinion, does that qualify under this ordinance?
Yeah, go ahead, Director Sullivan.
The initial opinion I would provide to that, Alderman Camo, would be that an organization would need to provide between, over 50% of its services towards youth, or have a dedicated school within its organization in order to qualify. We often use the 50% threshold, whether it be using that for a square footage interpretation or using it for a programming interpretation. That tends to be what gets uses over that sort of hump, if you will, of being a primary use. And so if an entity were to provide only 30% of its programming or 30% of its use area for youth programs, I would not qualify that, or classify that rather, as a youth serving organization. And that 50% standard is relatively common within the land use administration process nationally, and so that would be the threshold that I would use interpreting this ordinance today.
If I could follow up, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Under that definition, do you consider the Adult Learning Center a youth-serving organization? I believe most of their programs are geared towards the adult community.
Alderman Camo, if I may, or to the chair, if I may. My intent this evening, and I do not intend to dodge that question, but I did not intend to comment on specific entities as part of this discussion. And so I'm hesitant to do that. What I would say is that certainly when this ordinance was drafted initially and contemplated, the Adult Learning Center was part of that conversation, but whether or not they would be included in their current format of programming, I can't answer that question. And part of that is that I simply don't know what they offer for services at this point in time.
And
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It seemed like in the discussions for this ordinance, it was very geared towards the location currently known as Port Pierre's. And, I certainly don't want access to these things, for children. I don't think anybody does. It goes without saying. But it seems like this, just to me, seems like a solution in search of a problem. If you stand on that intersection, you can see Smokers Haven is 2 blocks away. There's a cigarette outlet 3 blocks in the other direction. You're across the street from a gas station that sells all the same products. And I don't think any of these places are currently selling these products to children. So I'm just not sure that this is going to do what we think it will. That's all. Thank you.
I just have I believe this wouldn't impact that particular facility. This would be those facilities after this goes into effect.
That is correct. And I would also just note, and perhaps I should have done this earlier, when this was initially drafted, we, like with any ordinance, started with 2 very extreme perspectives on this. One being that a large buffer should be applied up to 1 mile in size for these types of entities. The other being that there should be no restriction, and that it should be defaulted to the zoning and the code that applies to it. And so I'm surprised I didn't get questions about the 1,000 feet, because it may seem a bit arbitrary, quite frankly, but that 1,000 feet is a microcosm in representing the fact that this is very much a compromise that was arrived at after deliberation between my team and the folks that worked on this ordinance. And so to Alderman Camo's points, it would not address approvals that have already been granted and are properly vested. This is intended to be a compromise that looks forward towards future applications.
So I got Alderman Tebow, Alderman Cathy, and then Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this ordinance is extremely reasonable. It's small. It's not punishing that place for going in there, since this is taking place after that we've already gone through the zoning board. So I don't think this is an attack on that particular place. I think it's looking to the future of any type of vape or smoke shop that wants to go near something that's school related. If I could just, through you, Mr. Chairman, ask Mr. Sullivan, Director Sullivan, a question. So you're talking schools, you're talking nonprofit type organizations. I assume, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but I assume that a lot of these things, they're just gonna go through the zoning board, and the zoning board will try to apply this ordinance to whatever that is and make a determination based on that. So, for instance, you know, I don't think we have any of these anymore, but, you know, one of those big bounce house places, or an arcade, or a Chuck E. Cheese, where all there really is kids in there, with the exception of the parents that bring them there, except maybe some nerds like us here may go to one of those places. But outside of that, right, it's kids. So, but it's a business. It's not a school. It's not a nonprofit. So will the zoning board look at that, or is this stuff not included? Is that why it's not specific to certain things?
Go ahead.
A few questions to unpack there, but good ones. First, I would clarify that the administration of this ordinance will be done by planning department staff and folks within the community development department. And so I should also emphasize that although I am providing my concept of a primary use in the 50% threshold this evening, it is ultimately the charge of the city's administrative official, who is the planning director for the city, or me in their absence, to make the determination as to what a primary use is. And so that subjectivity does exist. I'm offering the 50% this evening. The interpretation could change in time. So ultimately, planning staff will make determinations based on the applications they receive, whether or not they comply with this ordinance, whether they'll need to head to the planning board for review. They will need to head there if they're conditional use. There may be variance applications. If it's outside of the zones that are identified in the use matrix, those would go to the zoning board for their review, approval, abutter notification, and then head to the planning board subsequent to that. Relative to your question about recreational uses, I'll refer to them. Whether it's a trampoline park, a Chuck E. Cheese, or the like, those would not qualify as youth-serving organizations. Yes, their primary clientele are those below the age of 18, but our use table already provides an alternative use treatment for those, and that is a recreational use. And so they would not qualify, nor would these tobacco uses or synthetic product uses need to maintain a 1,000-foot buffer from any such entity that you referenced.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know we have Alderman Kelly and Alderman Clee, but Alderman O'Brien raised his hand. He hasn't had a chance to speak on this. Do you mind if he takes, go ahead, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Just basically, I'm going to support this because I think it hits the flavor. I like what Mr. Sullivan, what you said. We would know it when we see it. And I think this fits the flavor. And I'm surprised you didn't mention the drug-free zones that are encumbered already codified by law within the state of New Hampshire, would basically say, you know, and I think that's within 1,000 feet, so I don't think you really made up the 1,000 feet 100%, but I'm not too sure to say. But I think there is a drug-free zone, and some would believe that by federal regulation, that some of these vaping, smoking, everything else, we're not talking about the guy walking the dog with the cigarette in his mouth, walking by the school, but I think the purchasing and everything. And lo and behold, if somebody were to sell drugs within the school zone, I think there's additional fineage that gets charged with this. So I think it's well-versed in law, and I agree with you. And I think I compliment the authors of this. It's very well stated. It fits within the parameters of we would know it if we saw it. And what this is the flavor of it is the protection of the children. And I think this, you know, definitely does that. And so therefore, I'm going to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just bouncing off that, when we talk about drug use, I can't help but chime in on being a clinician that actually tobacco use disorder is actually the largest substance use disorder in this entire United States. And it's actually the deadliest. It actually kills more people than alcohol use disorder and opiate use disorder. And I'm glad that we have laws in place to keep drugs out of our kids' schools. Alderman Catley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it. I had some other questions, but I just wanted to quickly thank Alderwoman Cleet for her definition on the subjectivity, because as I've learned, and some of the aldermen who have been here a longer time might know this, the planning board is really subjected to the law. There's not a whole lot we can do once something's been codified, which I try to explain to people. So if something meets regulations, we essentially have to say yes. So if you are that's subjective, and a business comes up and the planning board goes, I don't know about this, we're kind of stuck in granting different things. So having a little bit of ambiguity so we can talk about the type of city we want, I don't love it, because I love facts and logic and all that good stuff, but in this case, I think it's gonna serve a better purpose. But I just had some questions, mainly for the benefit of the public, because I feel like they would have similar questions. One is there you said a precedent for buffers in other industries. Is there a precedent like this in other cities or in New England or in the country for tobacco use?
If I may, Mr. Chair, I did a little brushing up on this just before the meeting this evening because I assumed this question would come up. I'm not aware of any tobacco-specific restrictions in the state of New Hampshire, but I was able to find a few examples around the country, and there are actually specific permitting processes called separation permits. And I found some in New York, California, and Florida, and they apply to several uses, including oddly pawn shops, smoke shops, and others. And I'm happy to provide some more information on that if the committee is interested. But it's not without precedent in other states. But Alderman Cathy, I'm not aware of any specific setbacks for this use within the state of New Hampshire. But I didn't complete a comprehensive review, but I did not see anything that was immediately obvious.
Follow up?
I have a couple follow-ups if that's okay.
Yeah, you can just continue on.
No, I appreciate that. I wasn't expecting New Hampshire. I just wanted to, I didn't think we were the only city in the country that was doing this, so. Earlier on, or in the ordinance, it says, quote, negative impacts. Could you clarify, or is that too subjective, and that would be up to the planning board as far as proving there are, quote, no negative impacts to the surrounding community?
To answer that, Mr. Chair, the burden of proof would be on the applicant to demonstrate that there are no negative impacts, but ultimately, and perhaps this is what you were driving at, the nice or nimble thing about the waiver process and the conditional use permit processes are that they provide the planning board its sole opportunity to be subjective in its review. And so in that subjective review authority, they would have the ability, based on the testimony, not only of the applicant, but of the abutters as well, to determine whether or not there are, in fact, negative impacts to the property. I'll say one thing as an example. Negative impacts can be mitigated by planting of arborvitae. They can be mitigated by site obstruction through the construction of a fence. There could be dedicated smoking areas if there are exterior smoking areas at all approved by the planning board. So some of that negative impact can be mitigated, but it's ultimately the planning board in that subjective review capacity that will make the decision.
Okay, thank you. Just and this is also for my clarification, direct abutment is what properties?
It depends on the context of a given property, but it would apply to properties across the street. It applies to those that directly abut the side property lines and the rear property line. But anything that touches with the added exception of those across the street, those will qualify as well, directly across the street.
Great. And last one, which is probably the harder one, and we covered this a little bit at the planning board meeting. I just wanted to see if you could either clarify or speak to future conversations or thoughts about if this would apply, or if we would be willing to move in a direction towards dispensary type businesses or anything like that, or I'm assuming there has been some discussion, and I'm sure people are gonna ask, if this, what next, what are we gonna do?
This is, to answer the question as directly as I can, this is not intended to address that use. I do not believe, based on the language that's been drafted, that dispensaries in the retail form or any other recreational usage would fall within this category. I don't believe it falls into the category of synthetic nicotine or electronic smoking devices if there's actually that product being dispensed on site. I know where you're headed there. I do believe that we should be proactive in that regard at such time that we believe that legalization is likely. But I'll also rely very heavily on what the state develops as model ordinances and the like once we get to that point. But this is not intended to be a precursor to that and get ahead of that potential issue that may arise.
Okay, thank you. I'm good, thank you.
No matter how many bills I co-sponsor at the State House, Sununu's not going to sign legalization of marijuana. Alderman Clee.
Thank you very much. I mostly want to make some clarifications, and it's funny that a often overly used phrase was used previously, solution in search of a problem, and it kind of made me smile, because when I explained this to my constituents going through that, and I said, we often hear those who are against it, that their favorite line is a solution in search of a problem. This is not a solution in search of a problem. This is a problem that arises, and we now have a solution for it. So I want to make that very, very clear. As far as the Adult Learning Center is concerned, they have a child daycare area that abuts that particular piece of property, which is why this kind of came about. So whether or not they had a 50% usage, which they do have a high child learning center and so on within that, I don't know what their percentage is any more than Director Sullivan has, but the truth is their daycare and play area was directly abutted it. Now, having said that, please note that the organization that's going in there did try to do everything they could to mitigate it, including much of what Director Sullivan said about putting up some kind of arborvitaes or type of thing. But the way that the building is so close to the property line, it was really impossible. So it should be noted that this organization did try to do everything they possibly could to mitigate this. So nothing against them. We're just looking as this is a solution to a problem. And I think my colleague who's on Zoom right now kind of made the point for us. You can stand on the corner and look and see this one and this one and this one. And that's kind of what we're trying to stop. So we don't have this. So we don't have a auto mile vaping, a vaping auto mile kind of type thing. That we are a mixed use downtown and in various areas. We don't want to have them side by side by side of really kind of anything, no gas stations, none of this. So, but I also wanted to talk about the dispensary, and as was talked about at the planning board, the dispensary is more of a medical type of use and no different than what we would look at that. This does not address any kind of marijuana use or cannabis or anything else like that. Do we need to think of something in the future? As Director Sullivan said, yes, I think we need to be proactive. Personally, I am not for the legalization. I'm kind of on the opposite end that you are, for recreational use.
We can still be friends.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you. I have no problems with it as long as we can start to get a testing of it and so on, like we do with alcohol. But the bottom line is that we have to put cannabis off to the side. Do we need to address it eventually? Yes, but not in this particular type of thing. So as far as the solution in search of a problem, this is a solution to a problem that existed, that came about at the planning board. A very, very astute member of the planning board asked that question about, is this reactionary? And our first answer was no. And then I kind of said, but yes. It's reaction to something that happened. Is it just a knee-jerk, oh, let's do something? No, it was very thought out. It was months and months of deliberating and compromising. If the group that actually brought this forward had their way, as Director Sullivan said, they'd probably only be on the borders of Nashua, and they would never be permitted in the city. And we know that that's not realistic. You know, we are an open market kind of city, and I think this is the best of all worlds to mitigate any kind of negative impact on our youth. And I believe that Mr. Affelberg cited some studies that very specifically showed that not having these type of things close to that actually lessens, and as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, that the tobacco use disorder is one of the number ones. You know, I put vaping in with tobacco use, and that's kind of why we did this. It's the alternative to tobacco use. In my opinion, it's just as dangerous from what I can hear from that. I am not a medical person, but you know, as I stated before, PAL as a service youth thing. I want to reiterate again, not the McDonald's, not the Funlands, not any of those things. They're recreational use type of things. So I think that I got all the statements that I want to make, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. And Mike, I do see your hand raised on Zoom, but I can't call on you because it's for Alderman unless someone makes a motion to suspend the rules. Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was happy to support this for a number of reasons. One is that it grandfathers in existing businesses, which I think is important because, you know, in the interest of fairness, we can't go back and retroactively kick people out, essentially. So that was a catalyst for me to support this. And secondly, you know, in the past, I have said multiple times that I'm against mandates, and I am. I voted against the raising the tobacco age here in Nashua to 21, although that happened federally. Anyway, mask mandate, things like that. You won't see me go for things of that nature. This, on the other hand, is a regulation. And I do believe that regulations are important, and I believe that they are an important part of our community standards. And I don't think that having something on the books that says in the future, you can't have a place that primarily promotes smoking tobacco or vaping 1,000 feet within a school or a daycare center or something like that. I just don't think that that's unreasonable. And what I like about this legislation is that in the instance where there's something that's, say if we go property line to property line, 900 feet from a school, but the entrance is on the other side of the building and the parking lot's on the other side of the building and everybody's gonna be on the other side of that building, then that applicant can go to the planning board and they can apply for an exception, and chances are they're probably gonna get it because they can have a pretty good case to be able to open up that business. So the other thing is too, I don't see these businesses proliferating. I think the tobacco use in this country is going down and down and down. And so I think we're taking care of a problem, yes, but I don't think it's gonna be something that's gonna impact all of these people who are gonna open up, you know, vaping stores or whatever in the city. I just don't see that happening. So I think for all of those reasons, this is something that I 100% can get behind. I think it was good legislation. I think it's drafted very well. And I congratulate all the folks who worked hard on this because it's these types of things are not easy to come to a compromise or an agreement on. So my hat's off to everyone, and like I said, I'm happy to support it.
Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support this legislation as well. I think it is good legislation. It doesn't, like you said, it doesn't go back and take away anything from anyone. I think the whole vaping industry came on the city quick a few years ago, and these places have started popping up everywhere. And you know, it's free business, so it is what it is. But I think putting this in will prevent future vape stores going close to places where children are, nonprofit places are, schools, stuff like that. You know, this place that's going up on Lake in Maine, you know, it's still right down the street from Elm Street. So, you know, I wish I could get rid of that just because, you know, it's still near a school. But so I think this is the minimal thing you can do. And I think if this was really an outrage in the city, we'd have people here speaking out against it. And that's a big testament to this legislation because, you know, the tobacco industry is huge. And if Matt went, you know, anything even close to a smoker, we'd have people in here. So I think it's a testament to the legislation, and I'm proud to support it.
Mr. Chairman?
I just have one question. Would this preclude people from opening within 1,000 feet of a pediatrician's office?
No. The answer being similar to recreational uses, a pediatrician's office is classified first and above all else as a medical facility. that would be the governing use category, and so my answer would be no. It would be treated as a medical office, and therefore it could be located within 1,000 feet.
Alderman Clee.
Yeah, I did want to add that one of the original people speaking to this was one of the hospitals, so we did kind of put that one to bed. I did want to add one thing. I did have a constituent who contacted me relative to this, and it was something that I had brought up to Director Sullivan as well, and that was, what if a school found the perfect building and wanted to open up, but there's a vape shop next to it? Could that school do it? And the answer would be yes, because that school would be then knowing all of the issues that were behind it, because this business was first, and you will not affect that business. So if they were to open right next door, abutting a vape shop, they would be able to do it. It would be a reverse engineering. They would be going in wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and knowing exactly what's going on. I don't think it's gonna happen, but just if the perfect place opened up, and that was the question that had been asked to me this past week relative to this. So I just wanna make that clear. They would be able to, and nothing negative would happen to that business that's already in place there. So just so that we have that out on the table. So.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I believe the motion on the table from Alderman Clemmons is to recommend final passage of O-22-010. All those in favor say aye.
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 Chairman says aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. All right. I believe the person we were waiting for has arrived. So going back to R22-023, do I have a motion to recommend final passage? Alderman Clemmons?
So moved.
Discussion. Is there a motion from anyone to allow Ms. Rinaldi to speak on this?
Could I speak first before?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to have Ms. Rinaldi and to come up and speak to this, but I just want to make a statement. I'm the liaison to the Nashua Arts Commission, and they worked very hard on this, and they worked very hard to incorporate it into like the master plan and kind of do it that way. I think they've done a phenomenal job. I'm not going to speak to any of the details to it because I'm not smart enough. It's above my pay grade. But I do think that they would be able to speak to it and so on. But it's a great plan. So.
Alderman Clemmons?
You as chair, Mr. Chairman, have the latitude to allow a non-alderman to come up and speak if it is relevant to the topic at hand.
That's great. I was trying
You
to
have the
play
power.
the book as black and white as possible. Would you like to come up and have a seat? Answer some questions? Or speak to this?
Where do you want me to?
Anywhere you want.
Your choice.
Why don't you introduce yourself and address and then give an overview of what you're asking here.
Sure. My name is Lindsay Rinaldi. I am the chair of the Nashua Arts Commission. I'm also the executive director of the Nashua Community Music School. And I'm super excited to be here today to share with you folks the next iteration of the Arts and Culture Plan for the City of Nashua. Part of the charter for the Nashua Arts Commission each year, which is a mayoral appointed charter, is to make sure that we are continuing to allow our arts and culture in Nashua to flourish and to grow and to come to new heights. And the Arts and Culture Plan is kind of the pinnacle for finding the direction for that to happen. So the Arts and Culture Plan that is presented to you tonight for your approval is essentially the next iteration or the continuation of the Arts and Culture Plan that was established in 2014. So it does get revised every so many years. It was scheduled to be revised in 2019, and that's when that plan started, and then COVID kind of derailed it for a little bit. But the good news is it actually gave us more time to be able to not only hold more public input sessions, but also to be able to really take a closer look at not just what are we doing well now, but what are some of the problems that we can solve in our community by using arts as a vehicle for success. And that's what I hope that you will find in our arts and culture plan. I know that this group has had the opportunity to maybe see it beforehand. How much would you like me to walk you through it? Because I'm happy to do whatever you think would be helpful.
Let's start off with, are there any questions? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, by the way. I did read through it this afternoon, and I thought it was fantastic. I'm a big supporter of the arts, at least in theory. And I had a question, this may be a little off, but I was just curious.
Yeah.
Do you get critics of the art plan in Nashua, and what are some of the things that people have wrong with, I guess, or don't want us to do arts-wise?
I would say that in our last public input session, before the plan finalized, one of the things that came up that was a critic was that the arts and culture plan was actually too focused on the economic portions and the economic benefits, and needed to focus more on heart and creating a vital artistic landscape for our citizens and for our families to thrive, which I honestly was very surprised at, because usually everyone is so excited to talk about the dramatic improvement and upgrades that it can do to our economy, which I do firmly believe in. So I was surprised and quite honestly refreshed to hear that the citizens that are involved in the arts or care about the arts really saw the economic benefit as an awesome positive, but a second to the vitality that arts create on a daily basis.
Follow, of course. Thank you, that was great. I just wanted to add, so I saw in the plan that the plan to update or to fix or to finish, I guess, the Greeley Park Bandstand, so I hope that's in the plans for the future, because that would be great.
It's one of the recommendations, yes.
Okay, and then also I saw, making sure Court Street stays there and making sure we get upgrades to that, and to make sure that, the Keefe Arena stays there. Those are things that are really important to me to keep here, because I think those buildings are different. They don't do the same types of things, and I think we need them separately. And so I'm hoping that stays, and I'm hoping that this plan helps to push those things along as well. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Alderman Tebow had said, those three things are really, really important long-term goals for the city. I can remember being on the Board of Aldermen in 2010, and you would have thought that the Greeley Park Band Shell was the only thing happening in this city at one point, because there was, what it was we used to rent out the band shell and allow people to bring in their own PA systems. And the neighborhood behind it, got upset, and so we had to make an ordinance that basically said you could only use the PA system that was there at the time, and I think it's still in effect now. And the problem is that PA system is not very good, and the band shell is kind of incomplete. So there's two problems. The noise gets behind the band shell, and then in addition to that, it doesn't, and because of that, it doesn't project forward. So you have two problems. One, if you're sitting in front of there, you can't really hear what's going on the stage, and two, everybody behind you can hear it perfectly well into that neighborhood. So it definitely is something that's been a problem for a while, and I was happy to see that it's in here as a priority, because it's something that I agree that, has been an issue for a while. And the other two things, again, I think we're gonna do something with it, very timely. We're gonna do something with Elm Street School. We're building a new middle school. So what do you do with the Keefe Auditorium? I agree 100%. It needs to be kept as a community resource. And what we can do to maintain and make sure that that's there for the future generations, I think is important. And same thing with Court Street. We had a big meeting about that the other night, with starting a fund for them, basically taking their money and keeping it in that building. So I think those three things are the things that I'm most excited about, and I'm happy to support the commission in its mission on making sure that those three things happen. So that, I just wanted to point those things out and say that I'm very excited and happy to support it. But the whole plan looks great. Those are my three highlights, but thank you for bringing this forward. Thanks for all the hard work. Thank you to Alderman Clee for bringing this up, and I look forward to supporting it.
Alderman Ryan.
Thank you. And through the chair to Ms. Rinaldi, good to see you again.
Always good to see you.
I gotta say kudos to the Nashua Arts Commission, and particularly to the Nashua Arts and Cultural Plan Working Group. This is pretty comprehensive. You guys did a yeoman's job with this, and I think it's very well written. But it may not have been seen by the whole complete public, and I think it should. You put a lot of hard work into this. So could they look at the Nashua Arts Commission at NashuaNewHampshire.gov and get a copy of this?
Yes, the draft
That they
is
can read it.
on.
Would that be the correct email address for that?
It's on the Nashua Arts Commission website currently.
So it's on the website.
Listed as a draft, because we felt as the Arts Commission that it was so important to get not only mayoral approval, but the approval of the Board of Aldermen before it became an official arts and culture plan.
Yeah, I think the public should see this because, like I say, pretty comprehensive, yeah, like what Alderman Clemens said. He answered some of the questions. Some of them are hot topics right about now being discussed, so nice job, thank you.
And our hope, so you know, is, once we get the approval by the city and all of its entities, our goal is to actually, as the Arts Commission, run certain workshops, run certain presentations, meet with the individual nonprofit leaders in the area, or arts leaders in the area, to give presentations on the plan and to kind of jumpstart that second top goal, which is cultivate collaboration, to get multiple people involved right away. So there's going to be a rollout of the plan to the public, in addition to it just being readily available as a part of the city's website.
Alderman Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have more of a PI and then a question. What happens if we don't adopt it? And what happens if we do it? Like, what does approving this do?
I think it's
Both at this level and the Board of Aldermen level. Like, for instance, if all the Board of Aldermen said, no, we don't like this, what would happen?
it'd probably go back to Ms. Rinaldi for changes, and then be resubmitted.
Would we say what changes we wanted, or would we just say no?
My guess is if we said no, our list of objections would be noted.
Okay.
And I'm sure Mrs. Rinaldi would take those objections to be changed.
Okay.
Anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, by the way.
Just because I'm new, I'm looking at a plan, I'm
just
like,
as new as you are.
I don't know what that actually does as far as like formality, so I was just curious.
That's my off-the-cuff answer on.
Well, point of order.
All right.
To direct answer, it is all committees make recommendations to the Board of Aldermen. This is not a mandate. It basically, by all committees, it's just a motion will be made and it should say that. If you read the motion, it says the motion is from Alderman Clemens to recommend final passage. And that's all this does, is a recommendation. So if you don't like part and parcel, it will depend on that recommendation to the full Board of Aldermen where we'll go next.
And correct, I'm sure we could amend it as the Board of Aldermen as well.
I was more asking on the Board of Aldermen level. I know we're recommending, but I'd rather just handle all these questions now than ask them at a full board, so.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we can get out early. Alderman Clee.
Thank you. This, much like the master plan, it's not coming in and saying we want money, it's not coming in that. And I want to point out that this group of people are engaging, and they took a page from the master plan. They invited and did public comment. They invited criticism. They invited, how can we make it better? And I sat in the meeting where they took all that, including painstakingly put the physical plan together, what was the best way of capturing someone's attention and so on. They were very, very meticulous and very thoughtful in every little aspect that they did. This is something that hasn't happened, as was pointed out, since 2014, but it is pretty typical of what, I think this is probably better than what's been put out there in the past, but I think it's typical of them coming and saying, this is kind of our goal. This is kind of where we hope to go. It's not stating that the ban shell has to be done by a particular time. It's not saying that the aldermen, if they pass this, have no right to close Court Street. It's just saying, this is our goals, this is our wish, this is how we can make the arts community better. And under, Ms. Rinaldi's direction, I really am enthusiastic as to how we're going to bring all of our entities together. I mean, we see things like positive street art, and we see music organizations, and we see, peacock players and so on, all of our arts. And I think through this commission, we're gonna get them all to talk, and how can we better, and even maybe it's because of COVID and so on, but there are now large art grants that are gonna be handed out more than ever before. And this commission has supported, with small little scholarships and grants and so on, all of the different arts organizations that apply for it. They're working on it right now. So I think beyond ever before, I was very excited to be put onto this commission, and I want to be a behind-the-scenes active member of this, but I sit back and watch this group of people, and they're amazing, and the thoughtfulness that went into it, and I'm glad that Alderman O'Brien pointed out that people should go to, I believe that you could just go from the front page and look at the community and so on, but that it's Nashua Arts Commission at nashuanh.gov is the contact of it to send an email and so on, but you can just go onto the city's website and it's right there. And this plan is there as well as many other things. And I don't want to use the word rubber stamp because I hate that term for anything that we do. I think what we do on this board is very thoughtful. But it would be a shame for anybody to have taken this much work and to be put off when this is a goal and a plan. And they very thoughtfully broke it out into different, topics and so on. And I mean, when you just look at the plan, you see collaborative collaboration and their action plan for that, and what are the different recommendations of it, short-term, long-term. They broke it down to how they could get things done. And just because they said something was a near-term or a mid-term doesn't mean that it wouldn't be swapped around as the need comes along. It's I think a fluid plan, but I have to keep saying the same word, and I say it with all heart. It was thoughtful, and I wouldn't say that they argued, but they debated as to exactly how things should be done and shouldn't be done. And I think that a positive recommendation is the only plan of action for this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Clee. I, for one, do you mind if I just?
No, go ahead, yeah, I did have a question.
I, for one, am enthusiastic about this. I've probably worked in the city for about 2 decades now, and I've lived here for over a decade, on and off. I travel a little bit. And, it always baffles me when I hear so much resistance to the arts and culture community, and especially when it comes to public-private partnerships. And because you don't get that when a public-private partnership with science, with retail, with any other industry, it seems to be only arts and culture in this town. And for one, it's a huge piece of the economy and a huge piece of human history. What's wrong with going to catch a play downtown, listening to Romeo and Juliet, or going down to Greeley Park and listening to a band? I don't see anything wrong with that. It brings the community together. I think that's what you did in your team, creating this and bringing it to the board. With that, I'll go to, I think actually Alderman Clemens had his hand up and then, or didn't.
No, I'll defer.
Great. Alderman Kaplan?
I appreciate that. I did actually have a question, but that was just more of a clarification. And to clarify, I understand what Alderwoman Clee was saying.
Okay.
So that was more just for my own edification. After this plan is approved, because that's where it sounds like it's heading, is there gonna be like a more of a breakdown? So for instance, when you say you want to fix some things in Court Street, there will then be a plan and a budget for how those things will get done from like here till when, I think it's long-term, so that'd be 2027. There'll be more bite-sized plans after this, demonstrating how that process would then go.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Just wanted for clarification. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Oh, Alderman Tebow.
You know, just one last, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last thing, I just, you know, probably from what I was saying before, you probably assume I would support it, and I will. I think in a city like Nashua, I think if you look at a city like ours and the size of ours, if it's a pie chart, you know, culture and arts are definitely a slice of that pie. And for cities that don't have the opportunity to do that, it takes away something that allows people to go and, you know, de-stress from what is often stressful days at work or whatever else is going on. I think COVID took a big bite out of that pie, and hopefully we can, you know, get back to where it was before. And I appreciate, again, all the work that everybody that's on it, and Alderman Klee for supporting it from behind the scenes. So thank you.
Any other questions? All right, with that, I believe the motion by Alderman Clemmons is to recommend final passage of R22-023. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, where are we? Oh, do I have we're tabled in committee, do I have a motion to remove?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to remove from the table petition for rezoning Gatewood Hills off Research Drive, A-798 to A-1010, A-1011, A-1008, A-1021. This was tabled at the March 15, 22 meeting.
Right. Any discussion on that motion? Alderman Kathy.
Just a clarification. We got this communication from Director Sullivan today. Is this in regards to the thing that we just rezoned
It is.
up in that same area?
Yes.
The same building?
And
No.
no, I'm sorry, no. This is from the last public hearing that we had.
Bring him up and have him speak to it.
Do you want me to speak to this?
Please.
Can we get the vote on to get it off the table? Yeah.
Right.
Can we, all those in favor of removing this from the table, say aye.
Oh, yeah.
Aye.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
All those opposed? Director Sullivan?
Well, pending motion.
Oh.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I think we need a motion to discuss it.
Off the table.
And I would like to make a motion to recommend indefinite postponement. And I will refer to that communication, but I think Director Sullivan is here to answer that, and I'll yield to his expertise.
PI?
Yes.
Are indefinite suspensions debatable?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Director Sullivan.
The requested withdrawal of the rezoning, what is a petition rezoning, is the petition that this committee heard just a month ago as represented by Jerry Prunier, and certainly I spoke to that as well. I can't speak to the reasoning for the withdrawal at this point in time. We have not had an opportunity to discuss with the Flatley Company, but our understanding is that they do wish to withdraw, and not sure which direction they're moving with the project that was proposed. But that's really all the information I have relative to this. But there are several other Flatley projects that are currently in queue with the city. This relates only to the rezoning of the area to residential that would contemplate up to 300 multifamily units. That's the element being withdrawn this evening.
Alderman O'Brien and Alderman.
Yes, thank you. And to further speak on my motion, the reason I made the motion to recommend indefinite postponement, as we sit here, plans can change, and then it will take refiling. This automatic body or zoning board may make future changes in the interim. So to codify it at that particular time and have them come back and say, well, no, don't I have this pending? Indefinite postponement clears it, basically, so it allows the refiling process. It's a lot cleaner to do it this way. Thank you.
Alderman Clement.
Yeah, the only thing that I would caution us doing this is because if they do want to come back, and I don't know if us indefinitely postponing this will kill it for the rest of the term. So in other words, if they wanted to rethink about what they wanted to do, and in a few months from now come forward with a plan that did require us to rezone those back to residential, the exact same residential that they're asking for now, we might have, unless we, vote as a body to allow it to come in under suspension of our own rules, I don't think that we could do that, and I don't think it's a good precedent. What I would recommend us doing is, to be honest with you, is just leaving it on the table and letting it sit here. That way, it effectively stays in the queue. If we never hear from them again, at the end of the term, it'll just die. And if they come forward with a new plan that's different, then we can take this off the table, because we know that, and do this. So I won't support indefinite postponement for those reasons, because I think it's better to just leave it on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
Sometimes I come in here knowing how I think I'm gonna vote, and I hear persuasive arguments like that. Alderman.
Yeah,
O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a wonderful opportunity, if he so wishes, for Director Sullivan to take this and offer his, we have two contrary, motions or thoughts on this. I wonder if he wants to discuss and weigh the balance to assist us in making the decision.
May I decline that? No, I believe that both are in fact viable options. Certainly our objective is to ultimately, first of all, I've stated publicly, we have no position on the rezoning from a substantive zoning perspective, but we obviously have other interests in development that's contemplated on the Flatley properties. I view neither action as prohibiting that conversation continuing in the future, and so I truly do not have an opinion on this. I'm happy to support it remaining on the table to facilitate future discussion, but I certainly do recognize that indefinite postponement is certainly it's a statement in a way about the current status of this petition in front of this group, and I believe that indefinite postponement could be combined with a reiteration of the concerns that were expressed at the last meeting, if the committee so wishes, that the developer work with the city to resolve some of those outstanding concerns that staff had. But again, I really don't have a clear objection to either proposal, and I'm happy to work with either to hopefully bring this rezoning back in a form that's more acceptable to the committee and to the city.
All right. Thank you, Director Sullivan. And stick around, because I'm sure there's more questions.
Sure.
So Alderman Tebow, then Kathy, and then Alderman Camo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my ward, so I just wanted to weigh in and question through the chairman to anyone that wants to answer this. So if we keep it tabled at the end of the year, is that when it disappears?
The end of the term,
Oh, the end of the term. So when's the term end?
in 2023.
December.
Okay, December 20, okay, basically at the end of the year. Gotcha, okay.
End of next year.
So, I'm not opposed to either one. I mean, I think either one gets us to not talk about it anymore unless it comes up again, I guess. I don't know. I just, they withdrew it. I think they're gonna do something else. I just don't know what it is. They haven't told me. They obviously haven't told Director Sullivan. You don't just pull it from your own land. They're gonna do something with it at some point, But either one works for me.
Alderman Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have to agree with Alderman Clemmons. I want to take a wait-and-see approach. I would love for Director Sullivan, if he can, or if Mr. Prunier reaches out to him first, hear what they have to say before making any action, because I don't think that the indefinite postponement is necessary. If we can just leave it on the table and then just continue from there, I think that we still have the, I don't want to say upper hand, but the authority at least to have that robust dialogue about what the city would require with continuing to build. But this is a good faith estimate. They're pulling. I don't want to be reactive and then say, okay, if you're pulling your petition, then we're putting it way over here. I'd rather just be, okay, let us know when you're ready, come back, we'll have a conversation at that point. So I think it's better just to leave it there, and then, we'll see what they have to say. And I want to hear what Mr. Prunier says if he reaches out to Director Sullivan at some point.
Director Sullivan, do you have a response?
Just a brief response. As you're aware, Alderman Moran, We were in active conversations with the Flatley Company, and we're ultimately looking to bring this committee this evening, if not a future meeting, a potential development agreement and concept master plan. And there were very positive steps towards doing so as part of our discussions with the Flatley Company. So I do believe there's good faith there on their part. Perhaps what would be the best action is to table this for this evening's meeting. I can consult with the applicant or their agents and perhaps get more reasoning or justification for the request to withdraw. And perhaps at the next meeting of this committee, there will be a final action to indefinitely postpone. But I can completely understand that that further clarification may be necessary before the committee chooses to do so.
Alderman Camo?
Well,
Alderman O'Brien, I'm guessing you want to withdraw.
well, I was going to withdraw my motion.
I will yield to Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Alderman Camo. Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, I would like to be recognized to draw my motion of indefinite postponement and be recognized for another motion. My motion would be to table.
I'd like to speak on that motion, so.
That's non-debatable.
Oh, that's right.
Non-debatable.
Great. Okay.
You
I just had one small thing to say. Would you mind withdrawing it just for a moment?
You recognize them.
Just so I.
Well, okay.
So, thank you. Like I said earlier, I was planned to vote indefinite postponement again after hearing Alderman Clemens, and this sounds like a very reasonable thing to do. One, you know, we have no more further information from the Flatley Company. Two, I don't know if it's a negotiation tactic, but I think still showing the city has goodwill in this manner is, I think, the best road to take, and any road we should take. But my opinion is, you know, I just wish they would share and have open communication. I know they're having a review at some point. I did request that master plan that was waived. I never received it. And I did speak to Attorney Bolton with you, Director Sullivan, and the main question that Alderman Cathy asked last month was, can we amend these rezoning? And the answer from the Corporation Council was yes, we can, with some specifiers. With that, Alderman O'Brien.
Well, I would like to say before, if I may, I could have gone either way with this. To me, indefinite postponement is almost equal or par two. One is non-debatable, one you may debate. But basically, let's remember, I mean, I'm open to all future conversation from the Flatley group, but it's their ball to move forward. I think we clearly brought our points home. Our job as the city fathers is not to give the store away, nor did I think we were giving the store away and not accusing as such. What I'm saying is we're trying to look as we get developed, and land is getting sparse at this particular time. And I think we're trying to look what would be the best deal, such as probably enhancing traffic or other things that at one time weren't looked at completely by this municipality in the past, where there was a great building and everything else that went on. And some of those problems today, as constituents go out throughout their business, come to suffer because not that foresight. So I think this is a slow, methodical process that we need to address. We do have the time, and so I would just leave it at that. It could have gone either way, but I do hope that the Flatley group would come back to Mr. Sullivan. I do hope that they would bring in their intentions and everything and work with this board. This board encourages, I do in particularly encourage development, and would like to hear from them. This was not Katie barred the door to the project. This is us to keep an open discussion. They have their needs, we have our needs, and our needs are the citizens of Nashua. And we need to have those questions addressed. And I think I speak for everybody here, obviously. So if I may, with the chair winking or not, I'll make a motion if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like, I'll yield to Mr. Clemens if he wants to make that motion.
I move the table.
All right, that's a non-debatable motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
I didn't say my aye, so aye.
All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 ayes and 1 nay.
4 to 1.
All right, that is tabled. General discussion? Alderman Tebow.
Thank you. With the table, I wasn't able to really speak, but I just wanted to say, we got this email, and I mean, it's from Flatley. It's not from some citizen wanting us to, kill this zoning or whatever. It's directly from them, whether it's from Prunier or Attorney Prunier or Mr. Walker. It's still from them. So I take it at their word. They, tell us something. So that's why I ended up at the end of the day voting that way. I just wanted to explain that because I was the nay vote there. It is my ward, and, my people, my constituents would prefer never to see them there again. And I know that's not the way it goes. I mean, they own the land, so at some point we do have to work with them, and I'm fine with that. But when we asked them for a master plan, they pretended they had one, or at least Attorney Prunier did, and they didn't. So that's kind of what we were waiting for on that. And I hope they bring something back to us, and maybe tabling this will allow them to do that. But I just wanted to put my point out there about why I voted the way I did and how I support my constituents with regard to Flatley building on this property. So, thank you.
Alderman Clemens?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, either to Director Sullivan or through you to, if you could, to Corporation Counsel, can we just find out if we do indefinitely postpone it, if they were to bring a new petition forward that's identical, would we be able to do that having indefinitely postponed it in this same term is my question. Through you to
Yeah, Director Sullivan.
Director Sullivan to ask Corporation Counsel or?
Yes, I did have a conversation about this with a representative of Corporation Counsel today, but I will confirm it. But my understanding is that they would have the right to return with an identical petition should it be indefinitely postponed. But I will confirm that. Also, as part of that confirmation, I do have a plan that was received by the city several years ago that I've located relative to the Flatley development. I will share that with members of the committee as well.
Okay.
And if you could just ask Corporation Counsel, whatever their opinion is, maybe a couple sentence email to the entire committee.
Absolutely.
And,
Thank you. Alderman Clemens.
and to just further that, I would appreciate that. And that's the reason that I recommend, it's not that I think that one is better than the other or whatever, but I guess my point was, I don't want us to close the door on something that we don't necessarily have to close the door on. So if Corporation Counsel says that, yep, they can come back with an identical petition and we can take that up, same term, couple months down the road, whatever. If they so choose to do that, then the next time this comes up, I will support Alderman O'Brien's motion to indefinitely postpone and go forward. My only intention was, let's not close that door tonight without knowing the answer. So that was my only.
Thank you, Alderman Clemens. Alderman Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If they came back with an identical petition, would that have to go back through the planning board? Since the planning board's already approved the rezoning?
Mm-hmm.
It would, okay. So they would just go back through the whole process again and ask for the same thing? Okay. I just wanted the clarification, so
It seems easier for them just to
come straight back to us, because
Back to
the planning
us.
board's gonna say yes anyway, so,
work with Matt
yeah, that's,
and work with us.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, I just wanted that clarification, because sometimes it's a little cloudy. Thank you.
If I may.
Alderman O'Brien.
That's why Alderman Kathy, not to be schematic in the terminology, but they would have to refile, yes.
So then we would indefinitely postpone the current petition and then receive a new petition and act on that? Okay,
We
Gotcha.
probably would have to do a little legwork, yeah.
okay.
If we have this on the table, we may want to indefinitely postpone this and then look at the newer petition, perhaps.
Okay.
We'll have to wait to see what comes back.
Any further general discussion? Seeing none, any public comment?
Yes, no one.
I was waiting for my wife to raise her hand. I know this is.
You're doing a great job.
Remarks by the Alderman. Alderman Clee.
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank this body for giving a favorable recommendation to both R-22-010 and R-22-023. And I also want to make it a point to say how hard the Arts Commission really worked. And I want to give kudos to Director Sullivan for R-22-010. He is the one who created the language, working with council and so on. And he painstakingly created the language as such so that we didn't have too many questions and we didn't have too many pitfalls and so on. So all the kudos go to him and his hard work. And that was even before he was the director, when he was just Mr. Sullivan. So, but he did, and he had to listen to me ad nauseum, and that's not an easy thing to do. So I truly appreciated all the work that he did. And on a different note, I don't know if this is just for Ward 3. I think it's actually throughout the entire city. But the sewer project, because of the way the water pipes are very close to, and most of the time on top of the sewer, when the sewer lines have to be replaced, Penachuk is coming in and moving the water pipes so that they're no longer on top. They're kind of maybe in the same trench, but they're not on top, so that one can work with the other without having to disturb that. And in doing so, part of the thing that the sewage program is doing is that they're relining many miles of our sewer lines, but they're also disrupting the water pipes. And the water pipes throughout the entire city, because of age and just because of the way they are, have, for lack of a better word, I'll call it a film, but it's basically manganese along the inner of the pipes.
Tuberculation.
Well, it is actually manganese as well.
That's tuberculation.
Is that what tuberculation is? Okay.
tuberculation.
So you use the technical term, I just use, I call it the mascara stuff.
I dealt with a lot of water.
And oftentimes, up until this point, people would see this brown water. Sometimes extremely chocolate brown is what it was referred to today by one of my constituents, and it truly was. And it's very disturbing. You see it in your toilet, or you see it in your bathtub, or God forbid you've done white laundry and now you have red clothes. This is directly because of all the work that's being done. It's not the water is polluted, it's nothing to do with that. If you do by the way, anybody who does white laundry and gets red clothes, contact Penachuk. They have this great red out, and it works, but it only works for white clothes. The other thing is, if you do see this brown water, for 15 minutes, flush your cold water taps, open up your faucets, and just run your water till it's clear. If it's in your toilet, you're gonna have to flush it a few times or clean out your tank. If you've run the tub, like I often see it, a brown tub that I'll have, and I have beautiful pictures of it, that means it's in my hot water tank. And usually that means you have to drain your hot water tank. So for those who know how to do it safely, please do that, because the remnants inside this. And oftentimes you might see your water seems clear, but you see little specks in your sink or your tub. And my husband, I think at one point, was accusing me of wearing too much mascara, and I'm like, nobody wears that much mascara, at least not in my house. Because we would have smudges on the tub and so on. And that's what looks like a mascara. That is just the manganese. People will tell you that it's safe to drink and so on. I'm not about to drink it. I have had a couple people who have said to me that their water is tasting differently. This is the number one thing. First off, you contact Penachuk before or after, whether it's been cleared out or not. Let them know that it's happened. That is important to call Penachuk. The other thing is to run your cold water for 15 minutes until it comes clear. It could take 20 minutes. If it's a consistent happening over the next month or something, contact Penachuk. Penachuk will pull your water meter, and they will flush your home out. They've done it to me, and they've done it to a number of people in Ward 3. This is a big problem in Ward 3, and it used to only happen when there was a large call for water. So right now, Penachuk is flushing the many of the hydrants. They do this every spring, and when that happens, you'll notice that it fluffs out all this stuff and it ends up in our homes. Or if, like Alderman O'Brien, when he was a firefighter, fought a fire connected to a fire hydrant, that's called a large call for water. When a large call for water happens, a large call of water can also happen when they're paving our streets, because they cool the streets through the hydrants. They attach to the hydrant and they cool off the streets. And oftentimes that'll happen as well. Sometimes it's just a disruption. It could be a sinkhole, it could be anything that happens. The vibrations to the pipes can create this. Do not panic. Contact Penachuk, let them know, even if it's cleared up. Because as often has been told to me by Mr. Goodhue and Mr. Ware is they can't fix and they can't track what they don't know. And if we just stay silent and get on Facebook and complain about it, it's not helping them any. So I'm just gonna ask the citizens that if they have this issue, contact Penachuk, run your water, cold water preferably. If you have to clear your hot water tank and flush your toilet a million times like I had to do. And so I talked to one person and thought their child was just not flushing the toilet properly. But these are kind of some of the things that you see, and it is very important. Our water is not contaminated. It's very clean. It meets the highest standard, and it's tested and pure when it leaves. Our pipes are old. They are working to get it. If they had to fix all the pipes, we could not afford our water bill. So having said that, I just wanted to make that very clear. Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien.
Yeah, I have to agree with Alderman Clee. The citizens, I think they do know, but never really looked at the technicalities. What you're dealing with is what's called the normal operating pressure of your water distribution system. You take a shower, flush your toilet, you take a shower. No way do you have the velocity that's inside the pipes that you have during the normal operating pressure. But you put a fire truck on it, or if you have a rupture, or perhaps a large volume of flow, then what happens, the water picks up the velocity, it knocks off the manganese, because all pipes tuberculate, that's the crusting inside, and that's what gets into it. As a firefighter for 35 years, I have drank that water, I'm doing okay. I don't have two heads, but it does not look pleasant and understandable, so I think you gave good advice, because as a Penachuk has got to get out there this spring to prevent it from the buildup in the interior of these pipes, they got to flush them. And so when the citizens see the hydrants open and everything else, they're testing. Plus, they're also checking for fire flows to make sure that the pipes haven't gotten too caked up, that there's adequate amount of water pressure available to fight fires and everything. So it's a good thing, and it's I know it's inconvenient, but it's part of maintaining a well-operating system that we do have. So thank you, and I thank you for bringing it to the public attention.
Thank you, Alderman Clee and Alderman O'Brien. Yeah, I see Alderman Cathy and Alderman Camo. I just wanted to...
I will yield to Mr. Camo.
The state, also, folks are also looking to whole home filtration systems if you don't want to be inconvenienced, but it's a little bit expensive. But I think in the next 20 to 30 years, you'll probably see more of those in homes. Alderman Camo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, Alderman Clee stole my thunder a little bit, but I wanted to thank Director Sullivan. I feel like half the time when I ask him a question, I'm really putting him on the spot, and his answers are always very well thought out and very knowledgeable, and I appreciate his insight on a wide range of topics. He's absolutely the best, so thank you for being there, Director Sullivan. And just a general point about our discussion earlier. I'm going to ask questions a lot over the course of the next almost 2 years remaining. I hope that the fact that I ask questions is not always going to be construed as opposition. I'm going to end up probably supporting the ordinance that we talked about earlier, but I'm never going to go in and just blindly support something. And, I hope that doesn't become a problem. I like to be well informed. I'm going to ask my questions, and then I'm going to vote accordingly. We're not always going to agree on everything, but it would be nice if we could, debate the topics and not the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Camo, and I would agree with that. I've had that experience myself. Anyone else? Alderman Cathy?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Luckily, I have not had that water issue that you guys are talking about. I've only had the white, where it's not super clear. It's kind of a white-ish color, and then it dissipates after a while. But I heard black smudges, and I was like, whoa.
No fires in Ward 7 throwing out the water.
Yeah, no thanks. I just wanted to state for the record that when the ordinance for the smoke shops, for lack of a better term, came forward, I was almost immediately like a no, just because I just don't like government getting involved in business at all, really. And I pride myself on looking at facts and data and all that other good stuff. But I have kids in the school system. I have friends who have younger kids that are in the school system, and I would hate the fact that they're walking by places like this all the time, because there is some sort of age influence with advertisements these days. It's if you're around a certain environment all the time, there's a stronger likelihood, you know this, you're a counselor, there's a stronger likelihood that you're going to be more intrigued or engaged in that sort of activity. And so, to me, it kind of just is more of a common sense, like, I don't want that around where my kids would maybe be walking home from school or hang out with their friends or whatever. If I had younger kids, I don't, but for other families that do, if there was a school like Elm Street, if it still existed and was that close to a place like that, I wouldn't feel great about that. And so, for me, it was more of a, what kind of city do we want to build? What kind of businesses do we want? We don't want to say no to all businesses, but we want to also be wise about the type of environment that we're creating, especially if we're going to be emphasizing the downtown area as sort of like the place to go. We would then want to build that environment up to be more, I don't want to say enjoyable, but like more conducive to a better quality of life, I guess I'll say. So that's why I ultimately supported the ordinance. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, before I go to Alderman O'Brien, I would just like to express my heartfelt condolences to former Alderwoman Lou's family. She lost her son recently, and it's very, you read the obituary, it's very, very sad. And she served our city the last term, and I think, I want to express, I reached out to her via email today and offered her both my professional support and support as just another as a parent. And I just want her to know and the city to know my family's praying for her family. And I asked President Wilshire to make an acknowledgement of this at the next full board meeting. With that, Alderman O'Brien, do you have a
Motion to adjourn.
All the motions to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it.
Alderman Kathy, this is what it looks like.